In this video we want to talk about the regulation of promotion. Now, advertising laws and rules are regulated to ensure that a company follows legal procedures when they advertise products and services. So it's not a free-for-all. When advertisers make advertisements and place them in front of the public, say on television or in magazines or in the press, they need to ensure that the advertisements conform to what is required from the regulatory authorities. And we'll talk about what's required in the course of the next few slides. So it's important that the advertising agencies know what's required of them in terms of the standards they must adhere to, and they must diligently and rigorously follow those guidelines. Advertising is a very powerful medium and is the most efficient way to convey a message. Advertising is, in a sense, very slick. It's very polished, and it's very persuasive. It's designed to be persuasive. It's designed to catch the watcher's or the reader's attention. It's designed and constructed in a way which is meant to influence the person looking at the advertisement. And therefore, there is a sense of responsibility on the part of the advertisers to ensure that what they are doing is correct. And as I said, we'll talk about the requirements of advertisements in a few moments. But there is an onus, there is an obligation on the part of the advertisers to ensure what they're saying is correct, that it's decent and legal and honest, and it conforms to many standards. And it's certainly not misleading or injurious to the well-being of the person who may be influenced by the advertising. It's vital that the general public are protected against unfair, negative, offensive advertising practices. Unfair advertising may be ones which are dishonest. The advertisers are claiming something that they can't deliver. It's fraudulent. They're attempting to sell a product perhaps which does not conform to what they state. That's very unfair, because the purchaser, in a sense, does not know this until perhaps they buy the product, in which time it's too late. It shouldn't also be negative. It shouldn't also be putting down ways of living or certain groups of people or their culture or the standards by which some people live. It shouldn't be negative. Advertising is meant to enable purchasers to make rational decisions. It's meant to be informative. It's meant to tell the purchasers about the nature of the product or the service. Admittedly, advertising is very persuasive and tries to get the purchasers to perhaps buy products that they would not otherwise have thought about. But if the advertising campaign is very persuasive, then it may mean that consumers are spending on the product when they don't have to, when really without that persuasion they would not buy the product. And perhaps some people can't afford to have that item as a part of their budget. It's certainly the case that advertising shouldn't be offensive. It shouldn't insult particular members of the community based on race, religion, age, gender. Advertising is not there to insult or to upset groups within society. It's there ideally to provide information about the product. Albeit nowadays advertising is broadly persuasive in many cases. It's trying to influence people's spending patterns to purchase the product, to make the product desirable in the purchaser's mind. But it's certainly not a function of advertising, or should not be a function of advertising, to offend any groups within society or any individuals within society. Advertising in alcohol, tobacco, and aimed at young adults, I should say, are heavily regulated to ensure legal, to protect vulnerable adults and children. So they're trying to ensure legality, they're trying to ensure that vulnerable groups, for example young adults perhaps haven't had the experience of other people, and they may be easily influenced. So aiming advertisements related to alcohol, for example, or tobacco at young people may persuade them to form addictions which otherwise they would not have. And of course these addictions are not good for their health. So aiming advertisements at children or young adults, that may be controlled more tightly and monitored very closely. The UK has over 150 Acts of Parliament and statutory laws that form a legal framework for advertising practice. So in the UK, advertising is very tightly controlled. Looking at advertisements on UK television, it would seem that it's a very easy system, it's a very liberal system. In fact, there are many controls in place. It means that the advertising agents or agencies are very skillful in the way they're able to design their material within the framework of the law. So they do abide by the law, but they manage to produce entertaining advertisements and persuasive advertisements as well. All advertising in the UK must be accurate, legal, decent, truthful and honest. Looking at the list, of course, it's very difficult sometimes to distinguish between truthful and honest and so on. But nonetheless, these are the mantras by which advertising are judged. This is what advertising is measured against in the UK. So there is a framework. Advertising is not a free-for-all. Advertising is controlled, and it's controlled by authorities who will look into whether advertisements are accurate, they're legal, they're decent, they're truthful, or they're honest. Now, accurate. A product or service must be accurately described and live up to its claims. If the advertiser says the product can do a certain function, it must be able to do that function. If the advertiser says the product has a certain attribute, it must have the attribute. That's what they said, and that's what must be there. If it's not there, it's not an accurate representation of the product. It's misleading. It's misleading the customer. It's cheating the customer. And that's a violation of the rules. It must be legal. Advertisements must not be in breach of law. They must not discriminate on the basis of age, gender, race, disability and religion or whatever. They must not discriminate. Advertisements are not there to insult the population or parts of the population, or to discriminate in some way against parts of the population. Advertisements are there to promote the product. So the issue is that the legal framework is there to protect the purchasers. That's the issue. And the advertising agencies must factor that in when designing their material. As I said, they're not there to insult or upset or break any other laws. They must be decent. Advertisements should not cause offence, distress, or fear, or use of inappropriate images. Here it's very vague because societies differ. They differ in the way they live. They differ in what they deem to be acceptable. Some societies are very conservative. Some societies have religion as a very important part of their society. Other societies are more free thinking. So there are issues here. In the context of the UK, it is essentially based around very liberal thinking. Now that means that some groups within society might find that shocking, or they might find that offensive. Well, the argument then is that those groups don't look at the advertisements, don't subscribe to that particular television channel, or don't buy that magazine. If they find it offensive, they should, in a sense, self-discriminate. They should take themselves away from that material. And that's an argument that's often made. Should be truthful and honest. Well, advertisements must not exploit or mislead inexperienced people. As I said earlier, for example, young adults or people under the age of 16. 16 is held to be a reasonable age, which after 16 people are deemed to have more and more experience. But essentially, advertisements should be honest. If they say that the product is of a certain type, it should conform to that statement. And it should be honest about the attributes of the product, the durability, the design. They should try to represent the product in a way that is honest. You'll note here, of course, that essentially what I'm talking about are very descriptive advertisements, very informative advertisements. Being truthful and saying that the car has got a certain engine and it can do so many miles per gallon or so many kilometers per litre, or it's got certain fact file associated with the car, and that file is representative of the car, and they say that's a truthful representation. Those are very informative types of advertisements. But we don't often see those, particularly in the UK. We see more persuasive advertising, the type of advertising that says if you buy this product you will become very fashionable. If you buy this product, people will like you. You will become more sociable. You'll be more successful in life. So many products on television don't seem to tell us about the product. Many advertisements don't tell us about the product. They tell us, or seem to suggest, that if we buy the product, we become more attractive, more successful, more interesting. We'll have a better lifestyle. So they're more persuasive than informative. So we have two types of advertising. We have informative, which tells us about the product, and of course in many cases that could be quite boring. And we can have persuasive. They're trying to persuade us to buy the product. They're not telling us about the product. They're just saying if we buy the product we will become more interesting people and we'll become more attractive in the society. Now, social acceptability and ethics. Well, advertising must be socially responsible and acceptable. Social acceptability differs between cultures and countries. So, advertising must be socially responsible and acceptable. It's very difficult to put down guidelines here. Some countries, as I said earlier, are very conservative. They are very conservative about the way images are portrayed, very, very conservative about the style of the advertisement, the music, the background. It's very much controlled. Other societies, much more liberal, much more open. And there is a difference between those countries and cultures. So it's difficult to say what's right and what's wrong here. Some people, as I said, are very open and very tolerant towards different images and different styles of advertisements. Other countries are much more conservative. Regulations concern widespread offence rather than individual. If an advertisement runs on television, let's say, and one person is offended, well, that one person may be exceptional. That one person may have all sorts of other issues that that can't be addressed. But if an advertisement runs on television that offends many, then that would be investigated to see if their offence warrants some sort of remedial action, perhaps the advertisement to be removed, perhaps some change in the way the product is presented. So regulations tend to deal with groups and widespread offence rather than individual offence. For example, displaying nudity may be considered offensive or even illegal in some countries, but in other countries it's quite acceptable. So why is it acceptable in one country and not in the other? Well, it depends on the traditions of that country, the way the country has developed. It depends on the type of structure that the country has, its education system, whether it has liberal values or conservative values. And if some people within the country are offended by the images, then in a sense they're invited not to look at the images, to turn off the television, change the channel, or read a book. So they're invited to do something else because the dominant culture accepts those type of images. So that is one line to be taken in terms of acceptability and ethics. Online communication has made it complex to police socially acceptable media. There are real issues about the internet and what is acceptable and not acceptable, and the style of websites and the content of websites. And although there are all sorts of other websites tracking down websites that may be offensive, it's very difficult to police it entirely. And there's also an issue, as I said earlier, as to whether people would want it policed completely. So some material is totally unacceptable if it involves violence or the exploitation of younger people or the exploitation of the disabled or the elderly or particular communities, or that's totally unacceptable. And those sites the police and the authorities try to track down, quite rightly, and deal with them. But there are other sites that are not, in a sense, causing any offence, but some people may disagree with them, may disagree with their content. And there is the issue. And given it's the internet, it's very difficult to find a solution to this. Some of the sites may be based in other countries, coming off servers the other side of the world. So it's very difficult to check and monitor continuously the whole of the internet. Now, forms of regulation and controls. Well, the UK operates under a self-regulation system. So the UK, they expect the advertising agencies to self-regulate, to make sure that the material they're making conforms to the legal, decent, honest, that framework. They should be making advertisements that do not cause offence, that are accurate and they are honest, they are legal. And the onus is on the advertising agency to conform to those standards. Self-regulation is referred to as voluntary codes. The process controls and monitors acceptable advertising and promotion practices. So voluntary codes. The different agencies subscribe to the voluntary codes. They have codes of practice and they adhere to those codes of practice. They reassure the regulators and the wider society indeed that they subscribe to these codes of practice, and the material they're going to produce will not cause offence or will not be illegal or dishonest, or in other words, they're going to make advertisements that are broadly acceptable. It's a voluntary code. They do this voluntarily. The UK's independent regulator is the Advertising Standards Authority, the ASA. They oversee voluntary marketing practices and set out the marketing communications as set out by the marketing communications industry. So the Advertising Standards Authority oversees this voluntary code of practice and makes sure that the different agencies are aware of what's required, and sometimes they may transgress, they may go a little too far and perhaps break one of the codes, in which case the Advertising Standards Authority may intervene and get them to retract or take back the material, the advertisement, perhaps remake it, issue apologies to anyone who was offended. So to avoid the cost of doing all of that and the bad publicity associated with it, the advertising agencies tend to self-regulate. They don't want investigation from the Advertising Standards Authority. And members of the public may appeal to the Advertising Standards Authority about certain advertisements that they deem to be inappropriate or illegal or dishonest. So bringing that attention on to the agency is not welcomed. So the agencies by and large try to adhere to the voluntary code of practice. Now, the role of the Advertising Standards Authority. Well, the Advertising Standards Authority is responsible for ensuring that all marketing material complies to the legal framework and rules out and rules as set out by industry standards. So the marketing material must comply. It must agree with the legal framework and also the rules set out by the industry standards, by the codes of practice that we just mentioned. So it makes sure that all of the agencies know what the codes of practice are and they know what the legal framework is. So in a sense there is very little excuse for the agencies to violate those codes of practice. They're aware of them, and as I said, they don't want adverse publicity and they don't want to be in the limelight for violating the codes of practice, so they tend to follow. But the Advertising Standards Agency can intervene if it considers that some particular set of materials used for promotion is inappropriate or is wrong or is illegal. There are no Acts of Parliament that cover advertising activity. Therefore, voluntary codes of practice are crucial. Parliament finds it difficult to legislate for advertisements. It's difficult to look at every conceivable scenario and cover it by an active law. So Parliament don't pass laws about specific activities in advertisements. It's very difficult for them to cover every possibility, as I said, and that means that they instead rely on voluntary codes of practice as to what is acceptable, not acceptable, and these are monitored by the Advertising Standards Agency. The Advertising Standards Authority will intervene if they deem that there is a violation of the codes. But of course, it also means that the codes of what is acceptable and not acceptable can change over time. It's more flexible because society changes over time, and therefore the codes can change over time as well. So it's not covered by Act of Parliament because Acts of Parliament seem to set down ideas fixed at one period in time. And of course society changes, and that means the Act of Parliament would have to be revised many times over many years to come. So rather than do that, it's left to the Advertising Standards Authority and the codes of practice, which change gradually over time. The ASA monitor and control advertising to ensure public safety from unethical, illegal and offensive marketing. So they are trying to protect the public, trying to ensure that the public is dealt with respect and also are informed accurately about the product. So there's nothing offensive about the advertisements. The role of the Advertising Standards Authority. Well, the ASA ensures that advertisements must be within the legal framework, clearly. If they're not within the legal framework, then they are illegal. They must not present misleading claims. They shouldn't say what is not the truth. They should not claim that the product can do something that it clearly can't do. They shouldn't try to get sales out of lying. So they shouldn't make misleading claims. They must be honest, truthful, decent, legal and responsible. In other words, they should be quite open about the product, the nature of the product, its attributes, its qualities, its price. There should be nothing hidden, or there should be no subterfuge about the product. Nothing should be concealed from the purchaser. The purchaser should be aware of what the product is and what it does, and have an honest and open understanding of the product before he or she buys it. And the onus is on the advertising agency to communicate that message clearly, honestly and openly. The Advertising Standards Authority facilities, well, they provide assistance on advertising approval before publication. So if an agency has got a problem about a particular advertisement that it's proposing and it's got some worry about it, it may go to the Advertising Standards Authority and seek advice and discuss the issues before it actually uses the advertisement. It should clarify anything that it's unsure of, to make sure that what it's doing is within the codes of practice. The ASA, they may inspect advertisements before referring to the Office of Fair Trading. This is an important factor because it makes sure that the ASA in itself is seeking further comment before it makes a decision. In other words, that the advertisements are fair and honest and open. It's also the case that the Advertising Standards Authority has the authority to withdraw inappropriate advertisements. So they may request the agency to withdraw it, and if the agency refuses to withdraw it, they may seek legal ways on which the advertisement has to be withdrawn. But it can also, of course, bring sanctions to bear on the advertising agency for not conforming to the codes of practice and for going against the advice of the Advertising Standards Authority. Now, the Committee of Advertising Practices, CAP. Well, CAP is a partner organisation of the ASA, which is responsible for reviewing and updating the British Code of Advertising, Direct Marketing and Sales Promotion. So it's a partner organisation that reviews and updates the Code of Code of Advertising. It's important that the Code of Advertising is kept up to date, and this committee is charged with doing just that. The CAP, the Committee for Advertising Practice, there may be several of them, of course, sitting at any one moment, but it's responsible for maintaining advertising codes and administered by the ASA. So it looks at the advertising codes, it monitors the advertising codes, how well they're working, what issues the advertisers have got with them, and what may have gone right or gone wrong in the recent past. And the committee itself is administered by the ASA. So the ASA look after the committee, form the committee, and ensure that the committee is doing its job in terms of keeping the codes of practice up to date. CAP sets standards to ensure successful self-regulation. They make sure that the standards they're setting out can be achieved, and that they're reasonable, that they're fair to the advertisers, as well as meeting the requirements of being honest and legal and decent and so on. So CAP is the way in which the codes of practice are developed, and then they're passed to the ASA, who disseminate the information amongst relevant members and keep everyone posted as to what the codes of practice are, give guidelines on how to meet the codes of practice. So there should be no ambiguity on the part of advertising agencies about what they can do and can't do. Now, statutory authorities. Well, self-regulation is funded by the marketing communications industry. So self-regulation is funded by the marketing communications industry. It means that the taxpayer is not burdened with this task. It's funded by the industry itself. And it also means, of course, that the industry is not just funding this whole activity of self-regulation, but they're also making sure that the members conform to it. It's pointless funding the activity if the membership are not going to adhere to the codes of practice. But as I said earlier, they don't want the wrath of the Advertising Standards Agency down on them. They don't want to provoke the ASA into action and get negative publicity, and it can be very counterproductive towards their agency, perhaps cost them clients, perhaps clients turn against them, and they just generally would get a bad name. So self-regulation is funded by the marketing communications industry, and generally speaking, the various agencies involved will toe the line. They will agree and go along with the codes of practice. Statutory authorities are government funded, however. For example, trading standards and the Office of Communications, known as Ofcom. Now, these are statutory bodies, and these are funded by the taxpayer. So trading standards and Ofcom, these are more related to government activity, and they are again watching standards, trading standards. They're watching how the communications industry deals with issues, and they may intervene, and they have got much more power to ensure that the industry conforms to the statutory requirements. Let's have a few words about trading standards. Well, trading standards is not for a profit organisation. It's not there to make a profit. It's established to support safe practice of trading within the UK and abroad. So it's there to ensure that trading is safe, and that what the producers and sellers say about the product is what the product can do. They are accurately describing the product. Trading standards ensure that laws have been complied with and the public are protected from unfair trading. They don't want the public to be cheated or deceived. Perhaps the product is dangerous, but they're not informed about it being dangerous. It could be a child's toy that is dangerous, that if the parents buy it for the child, it can perhaps it's got bad paint which may be injurious to the child's health, or it may have sharp edges which can cut or damage the child or damage the child's eye. So trading standards try to ensure that the products are safe. They try to make sure that the products are accurately described. Trading standards have been implemented to ensure businesses are honest in trading and safeguard the well-being of citizens. People buy products not to be injured. They buy products because they want the products for a particular purpose. Now, they don't want to be surprised by the product later and find that it's dangerous or it's caused injury, or because it was faulty or poorly made, that it did not represent good value for money. Sometimes when companies establish good brands, other companies cheat and make imitation products. So they're trying to derive premium prices off the established brand by making counterfeits. Well, trading standards intervene because clearly the people who buy the counterfeits are attempting to represent those counterfeits as genuine articles. And that's unfair to the company who has worked hard to establish the original brand. So trading standards will be involved to try and protect the public and try to ensure that what the producers are selling represent honest and open products, that they're not trying to deceive the public, and they're certainly not trying to, let's say, injure the public. So trading standards try to ensure that the products are safe and honest. Now, Ofcom. Well, Ofcom is a government-funded regulatory body for broadcasting, telecommunications and postal industries. So it's the Office of Communications. It's a regulatory body, so it's funded by the taxpayer. It's a government agency, and it controls broadcasting, telecommunications and the postal services. Ofcom oversees activities within the broadcasting industry and ensures that the public, the general public, are protected from harm and vulnerability. So Ofcom ensures that the broadcasting industry in total conform to standards and do not engage in the production of material which is insulting or upsetting or illegal or discriminatory. So they try to make sure that the broadcasting industry and the telecommunications industry and the postal industries as well tries to make sure that these operate in an ethical fashion. Ofcom's main activities include licensing, research, codes and policies, monitoring and complaints. So Ofcom, for example, license broadcasters. To become a broadcaster in the UK, they have to have a license from Ofcom. But Ofcom can also engage in research to see what the most appropriate courses of action are under certain circumstances. They develop the codes of practice that the broadcasters must conform to, and they monitor and also deal with complaints from the public. Now, consumerism. Well, consumerism is a social movement. It was implemented in order to give more power to customers over businesses. So consumerism is a general term that's used to try and promote the interest of the consumers, to make sure that the consumers are fairly dealt with by the suppliers. There is a balance here, of course. Consumerism should not punish good suppliers. The consumerism itself, this movement on the part of consumers to protect themselves, that should be balanced and fair also, fair to the producers. But generally speaking, consumerism is to monitor and watch companies in what they do and how they act, and highlight bad practice when they find it. The key concept of consumerism is to ensure customers are safe, to make sure that the customers be safe. The customers have a right to choose. The customers should be informed about the product, about its attributes, about its safety record, and so on. When there is an issue, they should be heard, so that their concerns are recognized and addressed. The Office of Fair Trading was organised to ensure consumer legislation is appropriately implemented and action taken against any unfair trading. So the Office of Fair Trading is a way in which the government ensures that legislation is properly implemented. Consumer legislation is properly implemented. And if there's any unfair trading or unfair practices, that these are dealt with. So this is a legal framework. The Office of Fair Trading can intervene to ensure that the consumer is being dealt with fairly and honestly. Consumer rights organisations such as Watchdog, Rogue Traders ensure that businesses are accountable for their actions. Now, there are programmes on UK television which are built around consumers' rights, and these programmes on quite popular television channels address issues that customers have had with, let's say, rogue traders, companies that are dishonest, companies that try to cheat, and they try to expose what the companies did and try to get some redress for the victims, the customers, from the companies. So to try to highlight bad practice and warn consumers about the possibility of bad practice and ways in which they may be cheated. And these programs are very popular in the UK. And there are various ones that appear. Watchdog, Rogue Traders are two very famous programs that deal with consumer issues. There are also issues associated with pressure groups, organisations not for profit and which lobby for a particular cause. That's what we mean by a pressure group. It's an organisation of people. They don't meet to make a profit. They're not selling something, or they're not commercial. Instead, what they're trying to do is to lobby for a particular cause, try to bring about a particular change, perhaps a change in the law, a change regarding some trading practice that they feel is very unfair, and they campaign for it, and they constitute a pressure group. they will perhaps make representation to Parliament or to their local political representatives and try to keep the pressure on the political representatives until some action is taken, until the issue is debated in Parliament and perhaps the law changed. Pressure groups can support environmental issues, consumer rights and protection. Generally speaking, pressure groups come into play when there is a sense of injustice within the community and people come together to form a group to try and put pressure on politicians, local politicians and then national politicians to bring about a change. So, for example, if a group was very worried about pollution in their area, some environmental issue, they could form a pressure group and then try to bring pressure to bear on the government to pass laws that will control the pollution in their area. So that's be the action of a pressure group. But really, pressure groups can come into existence for many different reasons. A pressure group may come into existence to support their local hospital from closure, or to try to expand their school. A pressure group is formed to try and bring pressure on the authorities to expand their local school, for example. Imitate campaigns to influence the behaviour of government and business. I shouldn't say imitate. Initiate, I should say. Initiate campaigns. They start the campaigns. They start agitating for some change. As I said, to protect the local school or to protect the local hospital from closure, or to campaign to have a new road built so as to alleviate traffic in a particular area. They can come together for all sorts of reasons. But they're really bound together because of a sense of injustice or unfairness, or a feeling that their environment or their world could become better if there was some action taken by government or local authorities or some agency of the government. So they try to campaign for particular changes, and they initiate campaigns and keep the campaigns running until some change is brought about. They aim to ensure ethical and social corporate responsibility. They try to ensure that the actions of companies, of advertisers, local employers, government in the area, that all of them are acting in a way which is fair. And they are showing social corporate responsibility. Pressure groups heavily rely on media to convey their message. This is damaging for the company, its brand and public image. If a pressure group are campaigning against the company, then they can damage the company, they can damage its brand, they can damage its public image. So companies tend to listen carefully to pressure groups and try to accommodate the requirements of the pressure group if they can. They don't want adverse publicity. There are all sorts of pressure groups we can recognise. Greenpeace, Fair Trade, Friends of the Earth, Organic. There are many pressure groups that we can immediately recognise. And by and large, because of their size, companies must factor in their requirements. And this also will be a regulator on the type of promotion that companies engage in, the type of advertisements they use, the type of images they use, what they're suggesting about the product, and it may lead the companies to start advertising, for example, the green credentials of their product, that their product supports the environment or it's made from renewable resources. And perhaps that movement has come about because of the impact of pressure groups. So in this video we've looked at various forms of regulation. We've looked at different agencies that make sure that the regulations are adhered to. We've looked at how the regulations can come about through the pressure groups and through the various formats in which the regulations are formed. The codes of practice, how they mutate over time and how they're policed. So this is the regulatory framework for promotion, mostly from the perspective of the UK, but the principles are quite general and can be applied in the context of most countries. But that's all we're going to deal with here, so let's leave this particular topic for the moment and say thank you for watching.